She walked down the aisle, ready to say, "I do are," but in front of everyone, family, friends, the world, he humiliated her. Cold, ruthless. He left her standing there, abandoned in her wedding dress, as whispers turned into cruel laughter, shattered and alone. She thought it was the end of her story, until a man no one expected stood up. A powerful padrino, with eyes full of fire and something deeper. Real love. This isn't just about heartbreak. It's about rising from the ashes, about second chances that change everything. If you believe that true love can be born in the darkest moments, comment, "I believe in love's strength." The soft murmur of violins filled the church as sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting golden patterns on the floor. Emma walked slowly down the aisle, each step light with joy, her white gown flowing behind her like a dream in motion. Her hands trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from overwhelming happiness. This was the day she had waited for all her life. She reached the altar, eyes locked on Michael, the man she thought would be her forever. He looked handsome, poised, but distant. She didn't notice at first. She was too wrapped in the moment, too full of love. She smiled at him, whispering, "We made it." Michael blinked once, then stepped back. The violin music faltered, a beat of silence. Then he spoke, his voice sharp and detached. "I can't marry you." The words sliced through the air like a blade. Emma's smile froze, her breath hitched. A gasp erupted from the guests behind her. She stood motionless, unable to comprehend. What? Her voice cracked, barely audible. "Michael, what are you saying?" He didn't flinch. He didn't blink. "I don't love you, Emma. I never really did." She stared at him, eyes wide, lips trembling. Her bouquet slipped from her hands and hit the floor with a dull thud. The world around her blurred. All she could hear was the rush of blood in her ears and the sound of whispers growing like wildfire among the crowd. "Is this a joke?" someone whispered. "Unbelievable!" Her mother buried her face in her hands. A bridesmaid turned away in silent horror. One of Michael's friends chuckled under his breath. Emma's chest tightened. The tears came hot and fast. Her knees buckled, but she held herself upright by sheer will. Her dream was collapsing around her, and he was just walking away. Without another word, Michael turned and left the altar, left her alone. As the door closed behind him, a cruel laugh rippled through the audience. Emma felt hundreds of eyes on her, judging, whispering, dissecting her pain. The whispers turned into open gossip. She must have done something. I knew he was too good for her. She looks pathetic. Her heart, just moments ago full of love, was now shattered beyond recognition. And there she stood, abandoned, exposed, humiliated. Emma couldn't move. The silence that followed Michael's cruel exit pressed down on her like a weight. Her chest rose and fell with shallow, shaky breaths as she stood at the altar, still in the very spot where she had been left, like a statue frozen in time. The bouquet she had dropped moments ago lay forgotten at her feet, its soft petals crushed against the polished marble. Her fingers clenched and unclenched, as if grasping for something to hold on to, something real in a moment that felt surreal. All around her, the once celebratory crowd had transformed into a theater of shame. The gasps had turned to murmurs. The murmurs had turned to judgment. She could feel their eyes, every single one. Her Aunt Rosa, sitting in the front row, avoided her gaze and whispered something to her husband, who shook his head with a mix of pity and embarrassment. Her cousin, Natalie, who had once been jealous of Emma's perfect relationship, smirked faintly before turning to whisper something to the bridesmaid beside her. Her mother, pale and trembling, stood near the front pew, lips pressed together, torn between rushing to her daughter or collapsing where she stood. And yet, no one moved. No one came to her. Emma's knees wobbled. The heels that had once made her feel graceful now felt like shackles. Her throat burned with unshed tears. She blinked furiously, desperate not to cry in front of them. Not again. Not now. Say something, she whispered to herself, though her voice didn't carry beyond her own ears. Her father shifted uncomfortably near the back. Her best friend Lily, bridesmaid, loyal, terrified, stepped forward instinctively but was held back by a stern look from her mother. Emma saw it all, as if from underwater, blurry, muffled, distant. And then came the laughter. It was soft at first, from the middle rows, nervous, almost unsure, but then another followed, louder, bolder, someone who found humor in the spectacle of a bride being left at the altar. The laugh sliced through the quiet like a knife. Emma flinched. The room felt colder now, like the light that had once filtered through the stained glass had dimmed, retreating from her like everyone else. Someone coughed. Someone else cleared their throat. The tension was unbearable. "Is the ceremony cancelled?" someone asked aloud, half joking, half serious. Emma's eyes widened. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She couldn't speak, couldn't move. Her body betrayed her. Her voice had left her. She felt like a porcelain doll, pretty, dressed up, and utterly breakable. Her heart screamed in her chest, and yet all she could do was stand there. A little girl in the third pew looked up at her mother and tugged at her sleeve. "Why is the princess crying?" the child asked innocently. The mother, flustered, hushed her daughter quickly and glanced up at Emma with guilt. Princess. What a cruel word. Emma turned slowly, barely able to face the rows of people now staring at her like she was a character in a tragic play. Her gaze swept across the church, searching for what? She didn't even know. A lifeline, a friend, a crack in the floor she could fall into and disappear. All she found was silence. And then a sudden sound broke through the tension. The unmistakable scrape of a chair against marble echoed through the vast space. Everyone turned toward it instinctively, heads swiveling toward the source. The noise, while ordinary, felt loud in the oppressive stillness. It came from the right side of the church, near the aisle. The movement was small, but it held power, purpose. Emma's eyes followed the sound. There, rising from his seat with calm, deliberate grace, was Alexander Moreau, the padrino, tall, impeccably dressed in a deep navy suit that set off his striking features, a man known for wealth, discretion, and a quiet intensity that made others both respect and fear him. No one knew much about him, except that he was powerful, and now all eyes were on him. He stood slowly, brushing invisible dust from his jacket, his eyes never leaving Emma's. His expression wasn't pitying, it wasn't embarrassed, it wasn't smug like the others who reveled in her downfall. It was steady, fierce, protective. Emma's breath caught in her throat. What was he doing? Alexander took a step forward, then another. Each footstep echoed with authority, measured, intentional. The murmurs started again, this time louder, curious, confused. What is he doing? Isn't he the groom's friend? I heard he owns half of the vineyard the reception's at. But Alexander ignored them all. He walked slowly, with the calm precision of someone who knew exactly what he was about to do. As he moved through the aisle, the tension in the church shifted. Something electric pulsed in the air, something unexpected. He stopped just a few feet away from Emma. She looked up at him, still trembling, her mind a storm of confusion and disbelief. Her lips parted, but she couldn't speak. Alexander didn't smile. Instead, he offered her something better: steadiness, calm, strength. "I won't let you stand alone," he said quietly, his voice deep and clear, "not in front of them." The entire church fell into stunned silence. Emma blinked, not sure she had heard correctly. Her voice failed. Her throat was raw. Why would you? But he didn't let her spiral. He reached out, slowly, gently offering his hand. His touch was warm, grounding. He leaned in slightly, enough that only she could hear his next words. "You don't deserve their whispers. You don't deserve this humiliation. Walk with me, leave this behind." Her hand hovered above his. Trembling, she looked at the crowd, still staring, still judging, and then back at him, into his eyes, and something shifted. Because in his gaze there wasn't pity, there was fire, and more than that, something else, admiration, anger at her pain, and something deeper, something dangerous and beautiful all at once. Emma's breath hitched. "I don't even know you," she whispered. "You'll have time to change that," he replied calmly. "But right now, you need someone, and I'm here." The words, simple as they were, wrapped around her like armor. She didn't know why she believed him, why her heart, so shattered moments ago, suddenly stirred at the sound of his voice. But she did. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. Gasps filled the church. Alexander turned to the crowd. His jaw was set, his expression hard as stone. "I think the ceremony is over," he said sharply. "You've all seen enough." No one dared to speak. He led Emma down the steps of the altar, never letting go of her hand. Each step away from the church, from the stairs, from the ruin of what was meant to be her perfect day, felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. She didn't look back, not once, because something had begun the moment that chair scraped against the floor. And it wasn't just her escape from shame. It was the beginning of something new, something wild, unwritten, and possibly redemptive. By the time they reached the doors, Emma's tears had slowed. They didn't stop. But now, for the first time, they weren't only tears of pain. There was something else in them, something close to hope. When the church doors closed behind her, she took a deep breath of the outside air, and for the first time that day, her lungs filled completely. Her world had ended minutes ago, and yet she was still standing, still breathing, and now, impossibly, no longer alone. The limousine door closed with a soft, mechanical thud, sealing Emma inside a world entirely different from the one she had just fled. The interior was sleek, cool, quiet, too quiet. She sat in stunned silence, her hand still tingling from where Alexander had held it. Her wedding dress, once a symbol of her most cherished dream, was now a crumpled, tear-stained reminder of everything that had shattered. She stared ahead, blinking slowly, as if waiting to wake up from a nightmare. Across from her, Alexander sat composed, legs crossed, hands resting on his lap. The silence between them stretched long, but it wasn't empty. It was full of questions unspoken, emotions unprocessed, and a tension that clung to the air like a summer storm on the verge of breaking. The car began to move. Emma turned her gaze to the tinted window, watching the city blur past. People on the sidewalk smiled, strolled, lived, unaware that inside this black vehicle sat a woman who had just been publicly broken. Her chest ached, not just from pain, but from exhaustion. She felt like a ghost in her own life. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander glanced at her. "Why are you apologizing?" She blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Because I dragged you into something you had no part in. You didn't have to step in like that." He was quiet for a moment before answering. "I didn't do it because I had to. I did it because I wanted to." Emma turned to face him fully. Her eyes were red, swollen from crying, but beneath the hurt there was steel. "But why? You don't even know me." He met her gaze without hesitation. "I know enough." She let out a dry, bitter laugh. "You know what? That I'm the pathetic bride who got left at the altar in front of everyone. That my fiancé, no, my ex, humiliated me like I was nothing. I know that you stood up there with dignity while a coward ran away," he said, his tone firm. "I know you didn't crumble, even when they wanted you to. I know you're stronger than you think." Emma looked away, biting her lip to keep it from trembling. Compliments felt foreign now, kindness felt undeserved. "I wasn't strong. I was frozen." "That's not weakness," he said. "That's survival." The car curved around a corner, and the sea came into view through the trees, blue, vast, endless. Emma hadn't realized where they were going, but she didn't ask. She didn't care. Anywhere was better than that church, that memory. Alexander watched her silently, his expression unreadable. "You don't have to talk," he added, "not until you're ready." But part of her wanted to. Maybe it was the adrenaline wearing off. Maybe it was the absurdity of her situation. Or maybe it was the way he looked at her, not like a wounded woman to be pitied, but as someone worth protecting. So she spoke. "I loved him," she said, staring out the window. "Michael. I thought we were building something real. We'd been together for 5 years. He proposed in Paris. I thought—" She swallowed hard. "I thought he was the one." Alexander didn't interrupt. "We fought a lot at the end," she continued. "But I thought that was normal. Stress, the wedding, work. He said he was tired. I thought he meant tired from planning. But now I think—" Her voice cracked. "I think he meant tired of me." A heavy silence followed. Emma turned to Alexander again. "You're really not going to ask me what happened? Why he left me? What my flaws are? I don't need the details to know that anyone who could leave you like that, in that way, isn't worth your pain," he replied simply. She stared at him, trying to gauge whether his words were genuine. She was so used to masks, politeness, performance, pretense, but he wasn't wearing one. He was calm, direct, unapologetically sincere. The car slowed. When it stopped, the driver stepped out and opened the door. Emma hesitated before stepping out, holding up the hem of her dress as she emerged into sunlight. A breeze carried the scent of salt and hibiscus. Before her stood a stunning villa built into the cliffs, with glass walls that reflected the sea and sky. It was modern and breathtaking, remote, safe. Alexander walked ahead, stopping at the top of the stone steps that led to the entrance. He waited for her to catch up. "I thought you might need somewhere quiet," he said. She looked around, stunned. "This place is yours." "One of them," he replied. She raised an eyebrow, half in disbelief. "Are you always this mysterious?" He smiled faintly. "Only when necessary." Inside, the villa was all white stone and warm wood, with open windows that let the light pour in. There was no trace of anything artificial. It smelled like lemon and fresh air. Emma stood in the center of the living room, unsure of what to do. The long train of her dress pooled around her like the last trace of a different life. Alexander appeared beside her with a soft throw blanket. He held it out. "You must be cold." She hesitated, then accepted it. "Thank you." He nodded. "Upstairs, there's a guest room. Take a shower, rest. I'll make something to eat." She looked up at him, confused. "You cook?" He gave a half shrug. "When I want to." She smiled for the first time all day, a small, surprised curve of her lips. "You really don't fit the mold of a padrino." "I never liked molds," he said, and walked away. Emma watched him disappear down the hallway. Still stunned by the surreal turn her life had taken, she made her way upstairs. The guest room was brighter than she expected, the windows open, curtains billowing in the breeze. The bathroom was lined in marble and stocked with essentials. She stood before the mirror for a long moment, staring at her reflection. The dress looked different now, like a costume. The woman inside it looked tired, fragile, worn. She began to strip out of it piece by piece, her fingers fumbling over the tiny buttons. When she finally let it fall to the floor, she stepped into the shower and stood under the warm water until it turned cold. When she emerged, clean, wrapped in a white robe, she found clothes laid out on the bed, simple, soft, comfortable, not hers, but chosen with care. Downstairs, Alexander stood in the kitchen, pouring wine into 2 glasses. The table was set with fresh bread, a salad, grilled fish, and roasted vegetables. The scent made her stomach clench with hunger she hadn't realized she had. "I hope this is okay," he said. She nodded. "It's perfect." They ate mostly in silence, but it wasn't awkward. It was peaceful, healing. After the meal, they moved to the living room. The sun had begun to set, casting gold and rose across the floor. Emma sat on the couch, legs tucked under her, a glass of wine in hand. She felt lighter, not healed, not whole, but no longer broken beyond repair. Alexander stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the sky. "You don't ask many questions," she said. "I find people will tell you what you need to know if you give them silence instead of pressure," he answered. She studied him, sipping her wine. "You said earlier that you knew enough about me. What did you mean?" He looked at her, eyes steady. "I meant that I've watched you at events, fundraisers, weddings. You light up rooms without trying. You speak to everyone with kindness. You remember names. You make people feel seen, even him, especially him." Emma stared, surprised. "I also saw the way he spoke to you," Alexander continued. "The way he dismissed your ideas in front of others. The way he left you standing alone at every party while he worked the room. I saw you shrink, slowly, quietly, and I hated it." She felt emotion rise in her throat again. "I wanted to say something so many times," he added, "but I didn't. I told myself it wasn't my place." Emma put her glass down. "Why did you change your mind today?" He walked to her, sat beside her, and looked her in the eyes. "Because today, it was my place." Their gazes held. For a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them, and in that stillness, Emma felt something unfamiliar. Possibility, not a promise, not a fairy tale, but the first fragile thread of something real. The sun had long since dipped beneath the horizon, leaving behind the soft orange glow of twilight that kissed the waves below the cliffside villa. Emma stood barefoot on the balcony, wrapped in a thin knit shawl that Alexander had handed her earlier. The wind played with her hair as the ocean roared beneath her, relentless and wild, just like the thoughts she couldn't silence. Everything still felt surreal. Less than 12 hours ago, she had been standing at the altar, filled with hope and trembling with anticipation. Now she was here, her makeup washed away, her wedding dress folded and forgotten upstairs, and a man she barely knew offering her peace, protection, and something that frightened her more than the heartbreak she'd endured: sincerity. Alexander stepped onto the balcony, carrying 2 mugs of steaming tea. He didn't speak as he handed one to her, but his eyes searched hers, always measuring, always present. Emma accepted it with a faint nod. "Thank you." "Again, you don't need to thank me every time," he replied, leaning on the railing beside her. "This isn't charity." "I know," she said quietly, "but I still don't understand it." "You don't have to," he said, glancing at her. "Just accept that not every hand offered to you is waiting to take something." Emma looked down at her tea, her fingers tightening around the ceramic. "I'm not used to that," she admitted. "I noticed." The words hung between them, soft but heavy. A silence followed, not tense, but thoughtful, the kind of quiet that held space for unspoken things. Emma took a sip of her tea and let the warmth settle in her chest. "I keep thinking I'll wake up," she said, "that none of this happened, that I'm still in my bed, dreaming about the wedding day, that I'll open my eyes and be excited again." Alexander didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was low. "Maybe you are dreaming, but if so, you're still here, still breathing, still standing." She glanced at him, her eyes searching. "You make everything sound so simple." "I make it sound honest," he corrected. "There's a difference." Emma turned her face to the wind. "What are people saying? Do you know?" He hesitated. "Yes, and it's what you'd expect. They're dissecting everything, speculating. Some are blaming you. Others are calling Michael a coward." Emma exhaled shakily, her stomach tightening. "Of course, I guess that's what happens when you become entertainment." He looked at her then, something sharp in his gaze. "You're not entertainment. You're a woman who was betrayed in the most public, humiliating way imaginable, and you handled it with dignity. That's not weakness, that's power." She let the words wash over her, unsure if she believed them, but aching to. A breeze passed, cold and sudden. She shivered. Alexander noticed immediately. "Come inside," he said. "You've been standing out here long enough." Reluctantly, she nodded and followed him back inside. The villa was warm and softly lit, the fire in the living room crackling gently. It was a quiet sanctuary, a contrast to the chaos that surely still buzzed across every phone and screen outside. She settled into the couch again, wrapping the shawl tighter around her. Alexander sat across from her, elbows resting on his knees, watching her with the same steady intensity. "You said earlier you'd admired me from afar," she said, her voice cautious. "That you'd wanted to say something. Why now? Why not before?" He was silent for a moment, choosing his words. "Because I never interfere in other people's relationships," he said finally, "even when I see them falling apart, even when I want to. And because," he hesitated, then met her gaze directly, "because it hurt to see you love someone who didn't deserve you, and it wasn't my place to take that away from you." Emma stared at him, stunned. The confession, though quiet, carried the weight of something long buried. "You hardly knew me," she whispered. "I knew enough," he repeated. There was no arrogance in his voice, no manipulation, just truth, delivered plainly. Her heart twisted. This man, calm, powerful, enigmatic, was saying things her fiancé never had in 5 years. He had noticed her, not just her beauty or her role as Michael's fiancé, but her kindness, her effort, her gradual retreat from joy. He'd seen it all. She looked away, struggling to process it. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do next," she admitted. "You're not supposed to do anything," he said. "You're allowed to grieve, to feel lost, to rest." Emma scoffed softly. "Rest, right, while every news outlet and gossip blog devours the story of the jilted bride." His voice darkened. "If it gets worse, I'll take care of it." She turned to him slowly. "How?" He held her gaze. "Leave that to me." There was something dangerous in the way he said it, not reckless, but formidable. She believed him, even without knowing what he meant. He was the kind of man who didn't make idle promises. She sighed. "I don't even know what's mine anymore. My apartment was his, our things. Everything was wrapped up in him. You'll have space here for as long as you need," Alexander said simply. She blinked. "I can't stay here forever." "I didn't say forever. But this," she gestured to the luxurious surroundings, the sea, the silence. "This isn't real life." "It is now," he said. "At least until you're ready for the next part." She looked at him, overwhelmed again by how easily he offered without asking. No expectations, no pressure, just presence. "Why me?" she asked finally. "Be honest." He tilted his head slightly, then stood. He walked to the window, gazing out at the night sky for a long moment. "When I was younger," he began, "I thought power meant control, having money, respect, status, and I got all of it, but it didn't bring peace. I've spent years watching people lie to each other, use each other. I've become good at reading people. And from the moment I met you, I knew you were different, kind, genuine. That's rare. That's not weakness, Emma. That's gold." Her throat tightened. She didn't know what to say. He turned back to her. "I didn't plan this. I didn't expect it. But when he left you standing there today, alone, vulnerable, humiliated, I knew I had a choice. Stay silent, like I always had, or finally speak." She rose from the couch, her eyes shining, a storm of emotion inside her. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "I know," he replied. "I don't know what I feel right now." "I wouldn't trust you if you did." A small laugh escaped her lips. Broken, but real. She looked up at him, truly looked, and for the first time saw more than just the padrino or the billionaire or the man who had rescued her from ruin. She saw someone who had once been lost, too. Someone who understood pain and silence and the ache of watching from the sidelines. "I don't know if I can ever trust anyone again," she confessed. Then don't, he said. Not yet. Just trust yourself. Start there. She nodded, her voice barely audible. Okay. They stood in silence for a moment, the fire casting soft shadows across their faces. Something had shifted between them, something fragile and impossible to name. He stepped closer, not too close, just near enough that she could feel his presence, solid and real. I don't want anything from you, he said, but if someday you want something more, I'll be here. Her breath caught. She didn't respond, she couldn't, but her heart heard every word. As the night deepened, Emma curled up on the guest bed upstairs. The window was open, the sound of the waves soothing. Her thoughts were a blur, but her body felt lighter. And downstairs, Alexander sat by the fire, his eyes on the flames. A man who had finally crossed a line he'd long refused to, not to rescue a damsel, but to choose her. Days passed with the slow rhythm of healing. The world outside still spun on its axis, but inside the cliffside villa, time moved differently. Emma no longer counted the hours by heartbreak, but by small, quiet victories. The first day she managed to laugh, the morning she woke without crying. The afternoon she caught herself humming, barefoot in the kitchen, as sunlight streamed in and painted golden streaks across the tiled floor. Alexander gave her space. He was there when she needed him, present but never intrusive, calm in the way only those who had endured storms could be. He worked in the mornings in a quiet room overlooking the sea, but by the afternoons he made time to cook with her, to walk along the cliffs, to sit on the terrace and simply exist beside her. They talked, sometimes about nothing, sometimes about everything. Emma told him about her childhood in Boston, her dreams of opening a flower shop before she got swept into the fast-paced, glossy life Michael had introduced her to. Alexander shared fragments of his past too, growing up in Marseille, the early loss of his mother, the empire he built from the ground up, and the emptiness that often came with having everything except someone to share it with. Their conversations never needed labels. They unfolded naturally, gently, like threads being woven together into something neither of them fully understood yet. One morning, as Emma came down the stairs wrapped in a light robe, hair still damp from her shower, she found Alexander in the kitchen flipping through the newspaper. He looked up and offered her his usual warm, quiet smile. "Coffee?" he asked. "Always," she replied, pulling her sleeves over her hands. He poured her a mug and slid it across the counter. She took it gratefully and inhaled the aroma before taking a sip. It grounded her. She noticed the headline on the folded paper before him. Runaway groom speaks, Michael Jennings breaks silence. Her body stiffened. Alexander saw the change instantly and gently turned the paper over, hiding the headline from view. Emma didn't look at him. She stared into her coffee. "So now he talks." "You don't have to read it," Alexander said. "It's just noise." She nodded slowly. "I know, but I also know it won't stop." "It will," he said, "when something better takes its place." That afternoon, they drove into the town for the first time. Emma wore a wide-brimmed hat and sunglasses, not to hide from the world, but to reclaim her presence in it on her terms. People stared, whispered, some smiled. No one approached. She held her head high, hand brushing lightly against Alexander's as they walked through the local market. He bought her sunflowers from a street vendor. They shared ice cream on a bench overlooking the harbor. It was nothing extraordinary, and yet everything felt different, real. That night, as the sky darkened and stars began to prick the velvet sky, Emma stood at the edge of the infinity pool, watching her reflection ripple across the water. Her mind wandered, not to the past this time, but to the present, to how she felt now, calm, curious, scared, safe. She didn't hear him approach, but she felt his presence before he spoke. "You look like you're miles away," Alexander said softly. She smiled. "Not miles, just a few months back, and then forward again." He stepped beside her. hands in his pockets. "And what do you see?" "I see a woman who thought she needed someone to complete her, and now she's not sure she needs anything except to feel whole again." "That's strength," he said. "Most people chase distraction. You're facing it." She turned to him. "Do you think healing always means walking away from everything you knew?" He paused. "No. I think it means knowing what to let go of and what's still worth holding." Emma looked into his eyes. For a moment, the air between them was charged, tender and full. Then, the sound of the doorbell shattered the quiet. Alexander's brow furrowed. "Stay here," he said gently. Emma nodded, heart already pounding. He disappeared inside. She waited, pulse racing. Something told her this wasn't ordinary. She heard voices, muffled but tense. A familiar voice, then Alexander's sharper tone. She stepped inside the house slowly, her bare feet quiet against the polished floor. As she neared the foyer, her breath caught. Standing just past the open doorway, dressed in a pressed suit, with dark circles under his eyes and desperation clinging to every movement, was Michael. He froze when he saw her. "Emma," she stood perfectly still. I didn't know where else to go. I thought maybe if I—" "You shouldn't be here," Alexander said coldly, stepping protectively between them. Michael raised his hands. "I just want to talk. Please. Just a few minutes. Alone." Emma stared at the man who had once held her heart and crushed it without mercy. He looked different now, smaller, paler. The confidence he once wore like armor had cracked. And yet, her heart didn't race for him. Her skin didn't tingle. Her voice didn't shake. She stepped forward, her voice calm. "You left me at the altar, Michael. You didn't call. You didn't explain. You just ran." "I panicked," he said, eyes wide. "I made the worst mistake of my life. And now you want what exactly?" "To make it right," he said. "To try again. To explain." Alexander tensed behind her, but didn't speak. Emma tilted her head. "You want to explain now, when the world already decided what happened?" "Yes, because none of them matter. Only you do." She almost laughed. The irony tasted bitter. "No, Michael, you don't get to decide when I'm worth the truth." He stepped closer. "I loved you. I still do. I was scared, but I—" "No," she interrupted. "You don't love me. You loved the idea of me. You loved how I made you look. And when things got hard, when I had questions, doubts, imperfections, you didn't talk. You ran." He fell silent, ashamed. Emma took a breath. "I'm not the same woman who stood at that altar," she said. "I've been through the fire, and I came out someone I actually like. For the first time in years." Michael's jaw tensed. "And what? Now you're with him." She looked at Alexander. He didn't move. He didn't interrupt. He waited. "I don't know what this is yet," she said honestly, "but I know how he treats me, with respect, with patience, with kindness. He showed up when you vanished, and he never asked for anything in return." Michael's voice cracked. "So that's it. That's closure," she said, her voice firm. "I'm choosing myself." He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. "I hope you find happiness, Emma. I mean that." And with that, he turned and left. When the door closed, she exhaled. Her knees trembled. Alexander stepped to her, reaching out, but she held up a hand, not to stop him, but to breathe. "I'm okay," she said. He searched her eyes. "Are you?" She looked up at him. Then, without a word, stepped into his arms. He held her tightly, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to collapse into the safety of someone else's embrace. Not because she needed rescuing, but because she had made it through the fire, and now there was room for something new. The morning after Michael's visit arrived with a kind of stillness Emma hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't the same numbness that followed heartbreak, nor the cold quiet of grief. It was something else, deeper, quieter, a peace that settled beneath her skin like sunlight filtering through clouds. She woke early, long before the sun reached its place in the sky, and stood by the window of her bedroom in Alexander's villa. Outside, the sea shimmered under the early light, endless and untamed. The breeze carried the scent of salt and rosemary. She pulled the linen curtain aside and pressed her hand to the cool glass. She thought of what she had said the night before. "I'm choosing myself." The words echoed now, not as a declaration, but as a truth she had finally embraced. She hadn't rehearsed it, hadn't planned to say it, but in that moment, facing Michael's regret and Alexander's unwavering calm, she realized she no longer owed her past anything. That part of her life had ended, the chapter had closed, and it had taken fire, pain, and the unexpected kindness of a stranger to show her the way out. Now, she was standing in a beginning. When she came downstairs, the villa was quiet. Alexander was outside, seated at the terrace table overlooking the water. He was dressed simply, in a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. He had a book open before him, a half-finished cup of coffee at his side, and a stillness to him that always caught her off guard. He looked up as she stepped outside, offering a small smile. "Good morning." "Morning," she replied, pulling the shawl around her shoulders. "You're up early." "I never sleep much," he said, "but today I thought you might." She sat across from him and poured herself a cup of coffee. Her movements were slow, deliberate. She didn't feel rushed. There was no need to rush anything anymore. "I've been thinking," she said, wrapping her hands around the mug, "about everything." He closed the book and gave her his full attention. "About how I almost married someone who didn't know how to love me," she continued. "About how I mistook comfort for connection. About how I convinced myself that being chosen was the same as being cherished." Alexander didn't interrupt. He only watched her, letting her speak. "I used to believe that love was something I had to earn," she said. "That if I was good enough, quiet enough, beautiful enough, someone would finally stay. But that's not love. That's survival." A long pause. "I don't want to survive anymore," she finished. The wind swept her hair across her face. She tucked it behind her ear and looked at him, eyes clear, no longer clouded by confusion or fear. "I want to live," she said, "to feel everything, to rebuild from the ground up, and I don't want to go back." Alexander leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable but soft. "You're not going back," he said. "Not ever." Emma took a sip of coffee. Her hands didn't shake anymore. "I've been thinking about Paris," she said after a moment. His brow lifted slightly. "I spent a summer there during college," she explained. "It was before Michael, before all of it. I used to walk through the Marché des Enfants Rouges every morning, buy bread, sit at this little café near the Seine, and sketch people passing by. It was the last time I remember feeling like myself." She looked up. "I want to go back, just for a while. Not to relive anything, just to remember who I was, before everything else." Alexander's gaze didn't waver. "You should." She blinked. "Really?" "Yes, if it's calling you, follow it." "But what about—" She gestured vaguely between them. "This." He was silent for a beat, then stood and walked to the railing, gazing out at the water. When he spoke, his voice was low. "I never wanted to be the man who saved you, Emma. I wanted to be the man who stood beside you while you saved yourself." She stood too, moving beside him. The wind whipped gently around them, carrying the scent of something new. He looked at her, and there was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before, something unguarded. "If Paris is your next step," he said, "then I'll wait. No promises, no pressure, just this. I'll be here, if you come back." She reached out and took his hand. "Not as a goodbye, but as a thank you for everything. I want to come back," she whispered, "but I need to go first, to be sure I'm not just running from one safety into another." "I understand," he said. "You should go with an open heart, and if it brings you back here, I'll be waiting, with mine open too." Tears welled in her eyes, but they didn't fall. For the first time in a long time, she felt in control of her choices. She wasn't reacting to pain or fear or loneliness. She was moving toward herself. In the days that followed, she packed only what she needed: sketchbooks, a few favorite clothes, a small camera. She found an apartment in the Latin Quarter, nothing fancy, just a space of her own with cracked tiles and light that spilled through the windows in the morning. Alexander arranged the flight but didn't come to the airport. They had agreed. No grand gestures. No dramatic goodbyes. Just the quiet promise of something that might be, if it was meant to be. She left the villa early, before dawn. As the driver pulled away, Emma glanced back at the cliffside, at the life that had held her during her most fragile days. The place where she had been seen, where she had begun to heal. Her heart beat with anticipation, not fear. In Paris, the city welcomed her like an old friend. The streets were still the same, the rhythm of bicycles, the smell of fresh bread, the music from cafes. She walked everywhere. She sketched strangers and sunrises, flowers in markets, lovers laughing by the river. She spoke little, listened more. Sometimes she thought of Alexander, his voice, his steadiness, the way he had made her feel seen without needing to be understood first. She didn't miss him with desperation. She missed him with depth, with respect. She spent 2 months there. By the end of the second month, she stood on a bridge over the Seine, the wind rustling her coat, and realized something. She was whole. Not because she had forgotten the pain, or because she had filled the silence with something new, but because she had walked into her past, faced it, and walked back out holding only what belonged to her. She returned to the villa on a rainy afternoon. The car wound its way up the cliff, and her heart pounded, not with anxiety, but with clarity. She stepped out, bag in hand, and stood in the drizzle for a moment, watching the waves crash below. The door opened before she could knock. Alexander stood there. No words at first, just eyes meeting eyes, then, "Welcome home," he said. Emma smiled, stepped forward, and this time, she didn't hesitate. She kissed him, gently, deeply, like someone who had made a choice, not fallen into one. And when they parted, breathless and certain, she whispered into the space between them, "I didn't come back because I was lost. I came back because I found my way." And in his eyes, she saw everything, not a rescue, not a rebound, but a beginning, a love that had waited, a woman who had chosen herself, a future that was hers to write. Sometimes, the most powerful love story isn't about finding someone else. It's about finding the courage to choose yourself first. Have you ever had to walk away from something that once felt like everything? Share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear from you, and don't go far. Another emotional journey is starting right now. Tap the next story on your screen and dive into a new beginning.